opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Shaw Cable Systems or of this station. Through our access policy, we provide the opportunity for community groups and individuals to express their points of view.
You are watching Lit Happens, Saskatchewan's showcase of the literary talent of the province. We have a blossoming poet in our midst today, and who has just released his second book of poetry, and he's here to talk about poetry, his books, his life. I'd like to welcome to the show Mitch Spray. Mitch, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Wes.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to come on the show.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about your book. I really want to get into the history of naming cows, but first, I really want to get the backstory on it. I want to hear a little bit about you and your life, where you grew up.
Well, I grew up on a real small farm. Became a farm since I graduated and left home when my brothers bought in, but Dad worked away all the time, and when I was little, we had like 2 cows.
Yeah.
65 acres. Grandpa did a lot of the farming once Dad slowly bought more land, but he was gone most of the time working in Alberta. But Dad was always a reader despite lack of formal education. I mean, he comes from a giant family, so there's always family around, and just sort of books in the basement, and so just read a lot. And around like grade 7 or so, you've read huge amounts, and you start thinking that, well, I could write maybe, and
yeah.
I mean, of course you can't at that stage of your life, but you give it a shot and just sort of pursued it. And my parents when they saw how important it was around high school, they got me actually a creative writing course through the Writers Guild by correspondence.
Awesome.
So that was sort of the first step through a long process of working with a whole bunch of different authors in Saskatchewan through a bunch of different programs. And it culminated in this book at this point, and more to come, lots of more ideas to come, but yeah. The farm growing up book is this one. So,
and this isn't your first experience with being published. You were just telling me you have a previous book through Jack Pine Press, who I always like to give a little plug to on this show, because they're such an interesting little Saskatchewan press.
Well, they make beautiful books, for sure. And their focus is handmade, one-of-a-kind books sort of thing, collector's items. It's a limited print run, and I'd had an idea of just talking with different authors of, okay, how would I do this? And I was like, well, baler belting is sort of like a hardcover.
Yeah.
So I could do something with baler belting and laser etch it, but I struggled for just whenever I thought about it, I couldn't figure out how I would bind it. Yeah. And then it finally occurred to me that swathers have knives that you rivet on the sections, the teeth.
Awesome.
So you've got this knife bar, so I could rivet the books. So I actually had an anvil on my balcony and was pounding rivets through these books. I ended up bolting most of them because to lighten the weight a little bit for shipping, I couldn't use as much metal as my original design. But I got laser belting or baler belting from a salvage yard. Nice. So they'd been laying out in the sun and in the rain and weathered and wore, and then you laser etch through, and the rubber comes through really, so it was like a grayish black with black really strong black coming through is how the cover ended up. And there was rust stains and all kinds of things, mold stains on the belting. So every single one was unique. And it was just, 25 pages, about 16, 17 poems, most of which are in this book as well. The Jack Pine, because it is only 60 books for sale, sold out fairly quickly, especially since it was such a unique
concept.
Such a unique concept and appearance and weight. There was just a heft to it that, there was lots of jokes about injuring people with these books.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's great. Considering your roots, you were just telling me you grew up in the Calvington area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a farm kid, and it all comes together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was... Thematically, it fit together with the weight and heft of the industrial sort of equipment that's around, but also a lot of this childhood sentimental sort of stuff. So it was a nice juxtaposition of how the two fit together.
Beautiful. Now let's talk about the history of naming cows. Actually, first of all, can you elaborate on the title? I love the title.
Well, it's one of the it's the title poem in the book, which is sort of just names of animals, where the names came from and how the name linked with the animal, and then just sort of, and this is over, some of them are stories that Dad told of. The first one is Kick in the Head, a cow that was kicked in the head as a calf and just sort of walked, would every once in a while go have spells and walk in a circle until it fell over. Turns out that sort of grew out of it, ended up being a good cow. So it was just one of those weird, and that's what the cow's name was Kick in the Head for the whole 15 years she was on the farm, right? So, awesome. And then and then it comes out through to the present with some of my brother's cattle. So it's just sort of episodic, sort of brief flashes of pictures of animals and it just sort of how the farm, you do get emotionally linked to these animals, but at the same time they're units of production, and the entire farm is sort of that way. I mean, there's an emotion and what I've always said is a reality, where just because you named the calf doesn't mean you aren't the one that skins it.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think about this a lot. It's a fascinating culture, cattle farming.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that you tied it together with poetry. It's amazing.
It just seems that poetry is such a compact, concise form.
Yes.
That for me, it just works really well for sort of episodic narrative, where you don't have an overarching, you don't have that, rising action climax sort of big, even short story sort of structure where you're fictionalizing maybe more so than you would otherwise. This is mostly true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always the don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, but
that's right.
It just is a lot more manageable, I find.
Yes.
The poetry is easier in some ways.
A lot of authors that have been on the show say poetry is just a more succinct way of telling a story. Poetry is voice and poetry is storytelling. So
yeah.
I think about that quite often.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good segue into what I wanted to ask you next. Is a lot of people question poetry in this digital age we live in. We're in such a fast-paced society. Why do you think poetry is still important, and why do you think it still resonates with much of the population?
Well, and it's funny, I have a bit of a different experience with that because of what my content is. A lot of the people that read poetry don't get it the same way. They're like, oh, that's great, but like the one that I've read quite a few times is my first experience of seeing an animal butchered. Yeah. And a guy came up to me and he's like, you must be a vegetarian. I mean, having that experience at such a young age, I'm like, no, steak is awesome. Don't worry about it. But the people that do get it are less likely to read poetry. So there's sort of a market disconnect where the people that would probably enjoy it the most maybe are less likely because their experience of poetry is 200 or 250 years old, right? Like it's not... Whereas there's a lot of things happening out there that are relevant to today. Mm-hmm. And that's where poetry resonates, where it speaks to your experiences, your reality, and maybe just puts it in such a way that you've always felt but never seen expressed or been able to express. And it is about somebody taking the time to put the words together in just such a way that it has more weight than, expresses something that you haven't taken the time to think about yourself, maybe.
Wow, that was, I think you really said it. Yeah. Now we've thrown out some great information about the book. Can we tell the viewers exactly where in the province can readers find it?
Well, it's available at McNally, both in Regina and Saskatoon, and then it's also available at the Regina University Bookstore.
Awesome.
And it's also on Amazon.com, or .ca probably.
Amazon.ca, yeah. And I also know that your publisher, Hagios Press, has a fabulous website.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been on it a number of times. It's really user-friendly and a lot of fun, and people can order books off their website.
Right, yeah. So direct from Hagios would be in that. Or you can contact me directly as well, and we can always set something up.
Yeah. There's always Facebook.
Yeah, there's always Facebook.
Yeah. Now, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to quickly ask you, you got a lot of energy going on. What's next for Mitch Spray?
Well, the next The next manuscript is fairly, it's about halfway there, I think. And it's actually all about road construction. I ran heavy equipment in Alberta through undergrad and stuff in the summers and a couple years between degrees. And so it's a lot of still episodic narrative, a little bit more cursing, a little bit more sexual tension sort of stuff.
Yep.
Just the reality, a very masculine environment. But I'm trying to do, and this is where the second half of the book comes in, that's very in development still, is I'm trying to do a fair bit of it from the female voice, where it's my sister or another woman that I worked with that I got to know fairly well, where some of their stories get told of sort of survival in this extremely masculine environment and maintaining femininity within a sort of some of the pressures that are there.
Nice.
So I think it's going to sort of have two parts where the two of them are either completely separate and juxtapose each other, or throughout they're sort of staggered. I'm not sure how the ordering will go, but
awesome.
Yeah, heavy equipment and living in hotels and being 21 is a lot of what the book is about.
Coming of age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know we're out of time, but this was just fascinating. I think you really enlightened a lot of viewers on, well, just the world of cattle and how poetry can tell a story, even a story you wouldn't even think it could tell. Like, I feel like we've really broadened some horizons here. So I just want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Wes.
It was great. That is all the time we have today for Lit Happens. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can see previous segments on the Shaw TV website or on my website, westfunk.ca. And you can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And I will see you next time on Lit Happens.